Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden. In this video, I am going to summarize the work we did on our Friday project Listed. So Listed is an app that will allow users to create, share, and watch lists of YouTube channels. And we've been working on this app. This is technically day 3 or day 4. So let me tell you what we did. First thing is we reviewed some of the issues and pull requests on the repo. This issue came from Indigo9740, who's the actual creator and core contributor to the Skeleton UI project. And what they mentioned is that when we had our initial tailwind set up, we missed one section in the documentation where we needed to remove a thing. And so big thanks to Chris for opening up this issue. And we fixed it. It was a pretty easy fix. Essentially, we just had to remove these base things in our post CSS file because Skeleton CSS automatically adds this for us. So we removed that. Good to go. And thank you again, Chris, for that suggestion. Next, we actually got a PR from Loading the Dev. And this is something I probably should have set up already, but I'm really happy that they made this pull request because they added a contribution guide. They added some settings in the package.json to make sure people were only using NPM. And they also added a code of conduct. And so typically in an open source project, you want these things so that people know how to interact with your project in terms of how do they contribute, how they should behave in the issues and comments and stuff like that. Big thanks to Loading the Dev for making this PR. So they added all of this stuff, and then during the video, I actually walked through how I reviewed these changes, because I didn't want to just merge these changes indirectly. I wanted to read the code of conduct that they set up. I wanted to read the contribution guides, and I made a couple of edits. So in the live stream, I talked about basically pulling down from their remote, checking out a branch, and then I made some changes on my own branch based off that branch. So if you look at this pull request, it includes all of their changes and then the changes I made on top of that. So you can actually see what I did here. So I basically added some links to how to contact me. I also changed some of the wording in the contributing guideline, and also updated some information about how to get set up with your .env and stuff like that. But ultimately, I took their PR as a base, made my changes on top of it, and then merged that in. And one of the things I did was I did a squash. I squashed all of the commits. So you can see that Loading the Dev had 3 different commits, and then I had 2 commits and a merge commit. But if you look at the main repo, there's only 1 commit, and it has both of our little faces on it. And that's because I squashed the commit. So on GitHub, there's an option when you're merging a pull request, you can choose squash commits, and it basically turns all of those changes into one single commit. And that's nice so that you can keep your main branch clean. So thanks again to Loading the Dev for that contribution. And now, if you go to the repo, there's info on how to get set up. So if you take a look at the code of conduct, it tells you our code of conduct and how you should behave in the issues and stuff like that. And then if you take a look at contributing, this has info on how to get set up. So it tells you how to clone the repo. It tells you that you need to have Postgres installed and all of that good stuff. So you can follow this if you want to get the repo set up locally. Awesome. Next, we started working on internationalization. So i18n, or also known as internationalization, is a way of adding translations into your application. And you might have heard this term, i18n, but what it actually means is there are 18 letters between the I and the N in the word internationalization, and developers are lazy. We don't like saying internationalization all the time, so we just say i18n. And there's a lot of different ways to go about this, but basically it makes it so that you can have a website where a user that has their browser settings set to English, when they visit, they'll see the website in English. And when somebody else has their browser language set to Spanish, they'll see the app in Spanish. There's a lot of different libraries you could use, a lot of ways you could go about it. So we started researching because I had no experience doing this with SvelteKit before. So I kind of needed to research to find a library that would work for me. i18 Next was one of the first suggestions. And this is probably one of the most popular libraries for doing this. And they actually include quite a few adapters for various frameworks. So they have an adapter for React, an adapter for Svelte. And we actually tried to implement this first. One thing, though, is this adapter, this Svelte i18 Next. Doesn't look like it's very well maintained. The last commit was in July, and then we looked, and there's a couple of issues open on the repo that haven't been responded to yet. And then we also weren't sure, would this library actually work with SvelteKit? Because Svelte and SvelteKit are not exactly the same thing. Svelte is the front-end framework. SvelteKit is the meta framework that works with Svelte. And just because something works with Svelte doesn't mean it will work with SvelteKit. So we actually didn't even try using this library. I was mainly worried about the fact that there are some issues open that hadn't been addressed. So we actually tried to just use i18 Next by itself and basically create our own integration. And it didn't work as well. We ran into some issues. I think some of the main issues we initially ran into were getting this set up with TypeScript, because we wanted type completion for all of the various tokens and things we were translating in our app. They do have this TypeScript example repo, and this did help us get up and going because it has the configuration and everything else. But one of the things I was really concerned about is the fact that the library gets initialized once and then used in multiple places. And why that's potentially an issue with SvelteKit is because you're running potentially in a single process that is a node.js process that's serving up different pages. And if you have a singleton object, if you have one thing that is being used by all possible requests, it's possible that requests could interfere with each other. And so we actually demonstrated that because this is initialized once and potentially used by users in different languages when their page is being server-side rendered, you could run into an issue where a user that speaks Spanish requests the website, and then that conflicts with another user that speaks English. So that was an issue, and we couldn't really work it out. So we kept searching. And then this library was suggested by longtime viewer and mod of the channel, Oscar. This talked about how you could get this library type-safe i18n set up with SvelteKit. So we followed it. We looked through their article. We looked through this repo. I mean, this library seems fairly popular. It has 1.3 thousand stars on GitHub. And then we looked it up on NPM, and it has quite a few daily downloads. Let's look it up on NPM. Yeah, and so 9,000 weekly downloads, somewhat popular. Like we decided to go with it. We followed this guide, we started going, and what's also nice about this project is they have a lot of different adapters as well. So they support all of these different types of runtimes, and we specifically wanted to use it with Svelte, and this actually was set up to work well with SvelteKit. So we followed the docs, we went, and we sort of got it working. But then we had to start digging into how SvelteKit works in terms of when things are running on the server versus when they're running on the client. And that's how we then got all of this integrated as well. So first up, we learned about hooks. So the hooks.server file is basically like a middleware. This is something that's going to run on every single request. So at the root of our project, we have this hooks.server.ts file. And this runs for every single request that comes into the app, and this runs on the server side. And so basically what we do is, using the headers of the request, we detect what language a web browser is requesting for a given page request. And so this function, init accept language header detector, which comes from that library, automatically parses the accept language header to determine what the languages a specific user is requesting when they request the page. So to see that in action, if we look at the network requests of this page, you can see that the browser sends in a request header this to tell the server that it's requesting what are the languages that this browser supports and requests. And so in this case, my main browser is just set where English is the preferred language. So it's the locale, yeah. And we were messing around with Chromium, where we were setting different languages in here. Now the page loads just fine, but I think a good example to show you one of our translated tokens, let me just add that back in. And we'll get into like what's actually happening here. I'll show you how we set up all the stuff later too. But this is how we get back access to our translated tokens. So this browser is set to Arabic. So you can see that right there, it says hello world in Arabic. And this browser is set to English, so it says hello world in English. And then if, for instance, if we got rid of that and then just set our default language to Ukrainian and refresh the page, now we see hello world in Ukrainian. The way that we set this up is if we do not have a translation token for the given language that the browser is requesting, we fall back to English, which is why even though this browser is set to Ukrainian, we're showing the English text here, and it's because we don't have this translated into Ukrainian, and I'll show you how we set that up. But basically, this is internationalization, like being able to show something different here based on the user that's making the request. So this user has their browser set to Ukrainian, they see that. This user has their browser set to English, they see that. And so what we need to do is when the request comes into our app on the server side, we parse that header, and then we're setting on locals the language. So this parses that header to see what the user prefers, and then we put it on locals. So locals is a concept in SvelteKit where you can basically put variables that you can access elsewhere. You can set up your types for your locals. So if you look here, you can set up what you expect to be on locals, and that way in other server-side files you get type completion. So we're saying lang will be a string array. So once we set that type up, we can use it elsewhere. And it's important to note that locals really should, most of them should only be accessed on the server side, and you can only get access to locals in server-side code. But we need to be able to pass this list of preferred languages to the client side. So there's one more step involved. So this runs on every single request, parses the header, and gets access to what the user's preferred language is. Then in our layout server file, this also runs on every request because the layout gets rendered for every request. So this file runs for every request, and we are passing that lang from the locals object as data that can be used in any page on the client side as well. Now, you would really never like expose all of your locals. This is bad practice. Do not do that. We're only exposing the thing that we care about and the thing that we need. When we're working in other pieces, we might have other locals that we need to use, but we won't potentially expose them. But what this is doing is this is actually exposing that array of preferred languages to the client side and also the server side, because this data, we have access to it here. Great. So a request comes into the app. This parses the header, puts the language on locals, and then this runs on the server to pass that array of languages down. And then we have this file which uses all of the utilities and libraries that we installed earlier. So this line of code takes that array of languages that we got from the server side and then passes it in to get the actual locale. So detect locale is provided by the i18n library. It's going to detect the user's language. We're going to load that locale, so that actually takes all of the potential translations and loads those up, and then it sets the locale. So now, inside of our pages where we're actually using the translated data, this will pull in the right translation. So I believe those are the main things. And I had the docs open here. So hooks.server runs on every single request, only does server-side stuff. You technically can have a client-side hooks as well, but we needed this on the server. Then we set the locals. Then we expose those locals through the layout. And then we actually are going to use that data in the page itself. And so this setup here we got from that article that was talking about how to use type-safe i18n. And in their article, they were using the params from the URL to detect the locale. But in our case, we wanted to use the header, which is why we have the code set up this way. So now that we have all of that set up, we can actually use the translated data inside of our pages. And that works like this. So we import LL from the library, and then we get access to all of our translations. So this library had a command we could run to automatically generate the base folder here. And so it generates like the svelte info and the types and everything else, and then we can start going in and adding our locales. So we specifically set up English. So if we look in here, this is the base translation, and we set things like the tagline, the sign up label. There's that hello world message. And then the way we've decided to do this is every page within our app, we're going to have a separate object here. So specifically the onboarding page, this is where the translations go. And so when you look at the code, Now, everything is referencing those specific tokens. So this pulls in the message, which is hello world. This pulls in the tagline. This pulls in the text that goes on the button. But as you saw, message is being translated. So by default, English is the base translation, and we're going to see hello world. But if a user shows up and they have German set as their default language, then we're going to see hallo Welt. And so here is where you would specify all of the translations in German. But what we wanted is, if there was not a translation specified, we wanted to fall back to the English translation. So that's what this little kind of line of code does. Basically take all of the English translations, put them in this object, and then you can gradually overwrite things as you translate them to German. So every other translation file you see in here is kind of just that. So take the base English translation and then override the ones we know how to override. And that's all of the translation that we've done so far. Ultimately, we still need to work on how we're structuring this, because I do want to allow pull requests. I want to allow people to basically copy this file into their language folder and then translate it into their specific language. But I have not... I don't think I've settled on the exact layout. I think I have to use this a bit more to make sure that I'm happy with how we're laying things out. And then also there's some text here that I'm not even sure if it's the final text yet. And ultimately I want to make sure that we have everything in its somewhat final form before people start translating it, because otherwise we could really get out of sync. Yeah, and so Ped RLZ is mentioning they added 2-language support in their project, and they just created a JavaScript object with 2 keys that do to the 2 languages they want to support. There's absolutely a lot of other ways you could go about this, and it technically doesn't have to be as complicated as we made it here. The main issue, or the main reason we're using a library like this, is because it has built-in support for parsing the accept header and different things like that. That's mainly why we tried to find a library to help us with this. The other thing that I didn't mention is TypeSafe i18n, this library that we're using, is actually running a type generator in the background all the time. So if you look at our package.json, we have this... we updated our dev script to run this command. So this is a built-in command after you install this library that automatically detects changes to any of the files in here and then updates the underlying types. And why that's nice is because now inside of our templates here, we get full type completion. So we can access the thing, and then we can see all of the things we have access to. Yeah, and so that's the other thing I guess I didn't mention, and why I also said this is not the final form. Right now, just like Forkisho was mentioning, we are mixing code with translations. And you don't really want to do that, because sometimes you have people that will do translations that are not developers, and you don't really want them to touch TypeScript files. We know that. We're not done. There's a lot of work we need to do here. And one of the things we'll potentially do is move these out into standalone JSON files. And that way, if someone wants to contribute a translation, they don't technically have to know TypeScript or anything else like that. We were just getting this set up. This literally took us 5 hours just to get here. So I don't have the energy or the time right now to pull it out into separate files, but that's absolutely how you would want to do that. So like these need to be separate JSON files. We also talked about we might go down the route of, you might have like onboarding.json, and then something like profile.json. And so each of these JSON files corresponds to a different section of the website. And then this will potentially have like messages and labels inside of it. There's a lot more we need to do here. This is just the base setup. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We don't want to just have this in our code. We need it as separate files. And we need it as something that someone who's non-technical can contribute to. That's mainly it, and this is what we ended up with. So we have our landing page, and we have our tagline that was created by ChatGPT, presenting the ultimate YouTube experience. Whether you're looking for new content to watch or want to share your own curated list with friends, our app has got you covered. So ChatGPT came up with that. And then you can go to the sign-up page, and then all of these things are being pulled in from the Internationalization library. And we also talked about, like, ultimately, this is kind of just a good way to structure your app in general, even if you're not supporting other languages, because now all of the text of your app gets centralized in one place. And you can start to do things where we might also have, like, let's say a common namespace and then like common labels. and something like a submit label. And we can do something like this. And so now everywhere in my app that has a submit button uses this specific language thing from the translation library. But if we have a new business request that comes in, they're like, hey, we want to change all the submit buttons. You change it in one place. You just say, let's do it right here. And now everywhere in my app that was using that label gets that updated message. So there's a lot more benefits to setting up your app this way, other than just translation. It is a nice way to like centralize all of your strings into one place. All right, I think that's it. Ultimately, we didn't get that much done, but it took us a long time to get here, and we did our best. I'm pretty happy with where we ended up. Like I said, we still need to do some work in this folder on how like we structure things. It still needs work, but so far, decent. We have a good basis to go from. Yep, and then the plan for next time is to start setting up our configs. So you'll notice there's probably some inconsistencies in the code. Like sometimes we're missing semicolons, sometimes we're using double quotes versus single quotes. We need to get our linter set up so that it detects those things and automatically runs. So we'll be doing that next time. It honestly might take us the whole time, but we're gonna try our best, and then we'll try to work on auth, and then we'll work on deployment. That's the plan, anyways. Thank you for watching this. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next live stream. And Coding Garden is supported by viewers like you. So if this was useful, if any of the live streams were useful, please consider supporting me on Patreon, or become a YouTube member, or a Twitch sub, or a GitHub sponsor, or visit my various merch sites. You can get a shirt like this. Because all of that helps me. All right, that's it. That's all I got. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you in the live stream.